of slavery, not only in the U.S., but specifically in Washington State, which was only a territory during the slave period, but yet there were slaves there, and take it all the way to what we call the ultimate CBA. That's the cost-benefit analysis. We believe that there has been an overemphasis on the cost of reparations and almost no emphasis on the benefits that paying 40 million African Americans what we are entitled to and the benefits that will generate for not only our state economies, but the entire national economy. And maybe if they take care of the people who built this country, they will learn that the benefits that they enjoy from that will boost this economy and take us out of the deficit situation that America is currently in.
My. I mean, and our good friend Nkechi Taifa said, be sure to mention Illinois in that list of states that have been passing these study commissions that are, I want, our people to understand who are listening around the country. We got listeners in over 45 cities. Hey, everybody. And we have listeners in 13 nations. That's right, internationally. So we want people to understand, the history, why it's so important to do these study commissions, why that's required. And I wanted to point out to everyone, you may recall that when we've been talking about the rise of, fascism in the U.S. And in the relationship between fascism and racism, that we've always talked about the quote white utopia that people tried to create with the creation of the states of California, Oregon, Washington State, and Idaho. That there was this attempt to create what they called a white utopia, folks. So when folks want to say, racism was a Southern thing, come on. It was all throughout the Midwest, and now we're talking about the West. So Attorney Wineberry, tell people why this legislation is named for Charles Mitchell and George Washington Bush. I know these are two unknown heroes. Please tell people about them, and then we'll get into why the legislation is so important. Charles
Mitchell is a phenomenal story. I predict that one day it will be a motion picture.
Oh, wow.
Charles Mitchell actually started, and this story is going to support everything you just pointed out about the creation back in the 1800s of a white utopia. Because when Charles Mitchell was born, he was not in Washington State. He was born into slavery in Maryland. And it was in Maryland where James Tilton, who had been appointed by President Pierce, newly elected pro-slavery President Pierce, who appointed James Tilton, who was then in Maryland, his surveyor general for the Washington Territory. When Mr. Tilton got married, his wife was given a gift, and that was the slave, Charles Mitchell. Charles Mitchell then was taken by the Tiltons as they journeyed by boat and wagon train ultimately to Washington State. He was enslaved in Maryland. His slavery continued in Washington State until one day he was sent on an errand by his slave master, and he met up with some people he had never seen before. They were African American men and women originally from California, but now living in Victoria, British Columbia, where Victoria, British Columbia, believe it or not, in the 1840s, 25% of that city's population in Canada were black. And they were in Olympia Territory, in Washington Territory, just basically picking up some goods, some foods to take back to Victoria. And they saw this little young man. He was 13 at the time. And they talked to him. They asked him, why was he there? Who was he with? And when they put two and two together, they said, okay, so is this your mother? Is this your father? He said, no, these are my owners. They said, oh, wait a minute. So you are considered a slave? He said, well, I've never heard that before. And they explained it to him. And they said, if you want to come with us, we're going to be back here at this spot tomorrow at 5 a.m. And if you're here, we will take you to freedom, because at that time, Canada had abolished slavery in the 1830s. This was now in the 1850s. And so Charles actually snuck away, hid himself on the boat back to Victoria. And when he got on Canadian soil, originally he was arrested and jailed. The owner came after him, and there was a trial, an international trial. You can see and read all of this in the book entitled Free Boy. And the judge, or the chancery at that time, ruled that if a slave from America was able to step on Canadian soil where they had banned slavery years ago, that slave was to be determined free. And that's how Charles Mitchell achieved his freedom, by escaping from territorial Washington and leaving that slave soil and going to Canada. And once we knew this story, it not only documented slavery on the soil of Washington State, we're certain Charles may have been the most famous one, but he wasn't the only one. That's why we named it in his honor. The way that story ends up, when Charles Mitchell got old enough, this brother returned to the States, to California, and fought in the Union Army for the rest of our freedom.
Wow. What a story. Ooh, I knew nothing about that, Daryl. Did you hear that? Some more Maryland history also?
Always got to love Maryland history, Barbara, and got to love history in general. And, I just have to thank Representative Wineberry a lot for just educating our audience with regard to those pieces on dealing with Canada. Well, but what about the George Washington Bush part of that, Representative Wineberry?
George Washington Bush is the exact opposite. Washington Bush was born in Pennsylvania, a free man, and went across the country on wagon train, horseback. Show how tough this brother was with his family. And he entered Washington Territory as a freeman. And so the laws then basically in Washington Territory said, if you are a slave here, then you remain a slave. Remember the Dred Scott decision, lawyers?
Mm-hmm.
The Dred Scott decision basically said that if you're free in a state, that's one thing. But if you come into that state as a slave, that state has the right, whether they are a free state or a slave state, to regard you not as a citizen but as a slave. But George Washington Bush met the exception. He was a freeman, born free in Pennsylvania, so he was always free. You got to imagine this brother had to keep his papers on him all the time.
Oh, yes.
But he got as far away from the east and as far away from the south as he could. And he was one who actually owned property confirmed by Congress. He was the first African-American to own property in Washington State when no one else could, even though he had to go back to Congress to get it confirmed. So we believe that those two, both victims of discrimination, but so obviously two separate stories, one slave, one free, were the ones most deserving of this study being named in their honor.
Wow. Love it. Love it. Wow. Can you tell us what are the most important elements and highlights of this legislation that the governor signed last week in Washington State?
Well, I have to give credit where it's due. We base everything we're doing now on the Japanese redress formula. Sometimes in sports we always talk about playbooks. Well, the playbook that we utilize is not a losing playbook, it's a winning playbook. I know it because as a young legislator, I was recruited by the Japanese American Citizen League to support their efforts for redress. The first bill for Japanese American redress was not introduced by a Japanese American. It was introduced by a white guy by the name of Mike Lowry in Washington State. And he was my congressman, and he was also my sponsor when I was a Congressional Black Caucus Fellow in Washington, D.C. So I worked closely with Congressman Lowry, and ultimately he moved on. But I kept the efforts going when in 1988, when we had to get the votes necessary to pass Japanese redress. And one of the things that the JACL taught us is always begin with a government-sanctioned study, not a private study, a government-sanctioned, government-funded study, because the results, findings, and recommendations from that study thereafter become the recommendations of the government, not of the black community, not of any other community of interest, but it's the government now saying we must do this. And so we saw that the Japanese Americans redress began with a study, a federal study. Once that study came back with its recommendations and findings to pay the Japanese who were interned or incarcerated, I say, during World War II from 1945 to 1948, once that study said Congress must do this, that's when the paychecks started getting created. And when we won the votes in Congress, I thought I was done. And I went back to my work in the state legislature, and they called upon me and future Governor Gary Locke to hand out the very checks once they were sent out to Washington State to the victims of internment. And from that point on, we had the playbook, the winning playbook for reparations.
Wow. And I know Adjoa Aiyetoro, you joined us, and you must be just jumping in delight, given your long history in this fight for reparations. We've already read your bio, but I just want to add to that bio that you serve currently as the director of the National Conference of Black Lawyers Reparations Research Project, and you just put out an amazing handbook on reparations that everyone should have that is interested in this subject of fighting for reparations. But Adjoa, when you look at what just happened in Washington State, why is it so important that we do this in every state? Why are these efforts to institute reparations committees nationwide so important?
Well, they're important because it, as your guest was talking, I was thinking, and I read the piece you sent me, Barbara, that the states need to own their role in slavery and in the legacies of slavery and in the continuation of the legacies that started with the state-imposed disadvantaging African Americans or black people of African descent, because we were that before we were in Americans. So, and by owning it, that means not only identifying where the state has created and maintained inequities and inequalities, but also what needs to be done to repair the injuries that flow from that. It's important, lastly, and it's not even last, it's the underlying reason why you want to do it, is the fact that you want to give an accounting and you want to make right to the extent that you can. You can't really change what was done, but you want to remedy, the state wants to remedy its own errors, its major errors. And in the treatment and the violations, really, errors is too mild a word, the major roles that the states have played in violating the human and civil rights of black people. And that sets a tone to go forward. We can't really go forward, really, until we address the crimes committed against black people of African descent by the state, own it, and make correction.
All right now. And Dianne, woohoo,